It all started on a very mundane day in our quaint main home. Yes, I know that's how every scary sounding story starts, but it's usually because it's true. It was rather late, and as I did every night before bed, I hopped into the shower. I was enjoying the hot water as it relaxed my muscles, when I noticed something out of place being toyed around by the flowing water. Now, for the past 20 or so years, I have lived with only my father. I never knew my mother, as she passed when I was only 2 years old. Ever since the tragic incident, my father has always been a neat freak, never missing a day of cleaning, vacuuming, and dusting every conceivable surface in the house. Not a speck of grime, dust, or dirt could ever be seen without him taking care of it immediately after. On top of this, I knew for a fact that he had absolutely no interest in women anymore. It was likely a combination of his previous loss and his rather unattractive bald head. I had seen enough to know he had barely any hair on his body, in fact. So, why is all of this even important? Well, on the floor of the shower, tempting to be sucked down the drain, was a single, long, black hair. I stared at it for a second, watching it be slowly dragged along, until I stopped it with my foot. How in the world had this managed to find its way in our house? Now, to anyone, this occurrence seems insignificant and rather foolish to make a big deal out of, but I knew my father, knew myself, knew our routines and our social ineptness. I knew that we barely ever left the house. I knew that no other person but ourselves had stepped through that front door in 20 years. I bent down to pick up the baffling strand of hair, the water quickly rushing down my back and into my face, and as I stood up, I turned the knob to stop its flow. I set it down on the sink as I stepped out, dried and dressed myself, then picked up the long, impossible thing. Call me paranoid if you will, but something about it just didn't feel right. It wasn't just its sudden and unexplainable appearance in my shower, it was the way it felt in my hand. It was heavier than it looked, far too heavy to be from any normal person's head. It was slightly thicker than your average strand of hair, and as I looked closer, I noticed that it looked more like fur. Deciding not to make a fuss of it, I tossed it in the trash and lay down on my bed. Thoughts of who or what could have placed this hair in our house danced in my mind as I drifted off to sleep, and those thoughts played further in my dreams. Images of great beasts in the yard, large rats in the walls, or a ring-inspired demon woman crawling out of my shower drain filled my head as I awoke with a start. I had heard a noise. Was it a shuffle? A knock? No. It sounded more like a click. With sleep still heavy on my eyes and senses, I checked my room, the hall, and the front door. Nothing was out of place. I chalked it up to my dreams, as any normal person would, but the nagging feeling of doubt hung in the back of my mind, refusing to dissipate. After that, things around the house got weird. We noticed various small objects moving at first, not disappearing, just randomly seeming out of place. A pencil would be on the desk instead of in the drawer. A towel would be off its rack and on the floor nearby. A bar of soap would be on the other side of the sink. My dad simply said he was getting older and was probably just forgetting his actions, but brushed off my concerns of things in my room and bathroom moving, places he never went. Around that same time, we noticed the dust bunnies. No, that's not quite the right name. They were fluffy and blew around like dust bunnies, but they were much darker and made entirely of the same heavy hair I had found in the shower. They certainly weren't alive or anything, as we both regularly plucked them off the ground, unceremoniously, and crushed them down into the trash. I noticed my dad become increasingly annoyed at their constant appearance, swearing it wasn't there just an hour ago, before taking out the vacuum. Whatever was leaving these hairballs around was clearly getting to him, but still, he disregarded any of my concerns. One day, something happened to him that, at the time, we could not explain. Our basement is small, tiny even. The way down is a small set of stairs off the dining room that leads to a turn, then to two doors at a 90-degree angle from each other. One leads straight out from the turn to the dark laundry room, with naught but a dull bulb and slit of a window, maybe less than a foot tall and 3 wide, illuminating the unfinished walls. The other, on the right, leads to the boiler room, even less finished and even darker. No windows was in that room, but it did feature another door on the same wall as the way in that looped around to the laundry room. My dad stepped down the stairs as I sat eating a sandwich at the dining room table, carrying his load of laundry down to the dark room. As I munched on the lacklustre meal, I suddenly heard a bump and a small crash. Standing up and staring down the dark stairs, I called out my father's name. No response. Assuming he had simply dropped the basket or something, I slowly crept down toward the door. It was closed, despite my dad being nowhere in sight. As I opened it and flipped on the switch, I noticed the lack of the basket or my father. Becoming increasingly worried, I called out his name again, louder and more urgent this time. I heard a stirring coming from behind and to the right from the boiler room. It sounded like someone moving along the floor with clicking. I slowly turned and opened the adjacent door to see my father's feet sticking out from behind the boiler. He was attempting to hoist himself up, having trouble at his older age. As I walked to the side to get a view past the boiler, I saw he was now sitting up, rubbing his head. The basket of laundry was on its side nearby, its contents strewn about the room. What made me question this event as more than a simple fall were the dark strands and balls of hair surrounding and laying across my father. I helped him stand up and gather the laundry, and he explained that he had heard a sound from the boiler room, but couldn't remember what happened after. As we searched the basement, the only things we found were that the door from the boiler room to the laundry room was open, as was the slit of a window leading outside. Matted hair clung to the corners of the frame and on top of the dryer, likely what the intruder used to reach the window. We called the police, who showed up and did a thorough search of the house and surrounding area. All that was found were large footprints leading from the tiny window to the forest beyond, where they quickly became untraceable. After explaining his encounter, the police explained it was likely someone who broke in, wearing some sort of poorly made Halloween costume, leaving behind the hair and the large footprints. They didn't have an explanation for all the hair around the house, likely thinking we were simply paranoid and connecting unrelated events. I even heard them joking about a Bigfoot break-in. What stood out to me, however, that no one else seemed to take notice of, was how in the world someone with shoes or feet that large could fit through such a small window. There was something more to all of this. I was sure of it. As I pondered the events the next day, we noticed the furballs stopped appearing, at least, at first. After about a week of their absence, they returned in force, and now, larger things began to move around the house, ranging from entire plates being on the wrong floor to couches being turned slightly. One night, the strangeness of it all really began to become clear to me. This all wasn't possible. We were always home and would hear anyone else in the house. We especially would hear something like a couch being moved around, but somehow these things continued to happen without us as much as hearing a creak. The only explanation was that of the paranormal or the supernatural. It had come from downstairs. Sitting up in my bed, I listened closely for the sound again. It did not come. I crept out of my room toward the dining room, noticing the clock read just after midnight. The usual sounds of bugs and owls from the forest outside were absent. They were louder, and spaced further apart now. They sounded like someone with long nails poking the walls or floor. The light at the bottom of the stairs flickered on as I flipped the switch. The noises ceased. I was frozen with fear and panic at the top of the stairs, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. The pumping of my heart and the blood rushing through my head filled the silence of the night. I willed myself to take a step down onto the first stair, then another, then another. I was soon at the bottom, and turned to face the laundry room door. It was ajar, with the light of the moon barely illuminating the darkness beyond. As I opened it, logic began to take hold of my actions, and I closed and locked it behind me. There was clearly something down here with me, most likely in the boiler room like that day my father was attacked, and I had to make sure it wouldn't loop around behind me to attack or escape. I noticed that both the windows and the other door to the boiler room were also ajar. As I snapped the windows shut, I winced at the loud sound. Normally it would be nothing more than a click, but in the stillness and the darkness of the basement, it felt like thunder. I turned to face the unlocked, ajar door to the boiler, noting, with a twinge of fear, the darkness beyond. The switch was located by the other door, at least a solid 3 steps from this one. I would have to enter into the darkness. As the door creaked open, I saw the dark form of the boiler ahead of me, but it seemed off. It was larger than I recalled. The light from the laundry room stopped short at its base, failing to illuminate who or what lay behind it. As I thought this, I realised, with shock, that a new sound was now audible from the dark shape. Breathing. Locking the door behind me, I slowly sidestepped towards the other door, noting that it was also locked. There was no way out of the room now. Carefully, I reached towards the switch, never taking my gaze from the blotch of darkness ahead. I flipped it, and I wish with every fibre of my being that I had not seen what I beheld in front of me. The supposed stories of Bigfoot you hear from crazies on the internet or rednecks out in the forest will say it is a tall, human-shaped animal, roughly 7 feet tall, covered in brown fur with huge feet and hands. What I saw fell short of the well-known cryptid, fell short of reason, fell short of nature. It was tall, taller than 7 feet. It stooped down to keep its form within the room, the back of its neck touching the ceiling. The slender, fur-covered appendage of a neck above its shoulders curved down to its head, which was covered in thick, almost black strands of hair, just as the rest of its body was. It had long, drooping arms that reached the ground. Where it should have had fingers were instead long, sharp-pointed claws, blacker than the night itself. But its head was what drew my gaze immediately. It lacked any features on its face, if you can call it that, save for its 2 awful eyes. They were large, at least 6 inches across, and were completely yellow. They had no pupils, no whites, not even any veins, just a sickening, unhealthy looking yellow. They seemed to stare into me, into my soul, and in them I could see my life stretched beyond and before me. I saw death, I saw life, I saw beauty, hatred, disease, destruction. I saw evil itself. This was no ordinary cryptid or beast of the forest. This was a being as old as knowledge, as old as life, as old as death. The fear and awe that filled my head were too powerful. I fell to the ground, weeping and screaming, as I saw it step. No, it just appeared in front of me. Its claws clicked against the stone floor rhythmically, as if in some musical, horrible language. As it turned its head sideways, it never took its sickening eyes from me. My dad says he found me in a fetal position in the doorway, in a pool of tears, spit, vomit and dark hair. When I saw him, I couldn't stop screaming. The next thing I remember after gazing upon that horrid creature was waking up in a hospital. The doctors explained in a confused manner that my body appeared to have gone 2 days without food or water. I tried to tell them of what I saw, and what they needed to know, but they all looked at me sadly, as if to say I was long gone. They thought I was insane. Everyone except my father. Sometime later, he told me that he had come down those stairs when he heard my screams. He picked me up and began to rush me upstairs, but as he had passed by the small window, he saw 2 large yellow discs in the wood. He recalled that as he gazed towards them, he felt a fear unlike anything he had felt before, and knew whatever had happened to me happened because of those horrid, evil eyes in the woods. After some rest and nourishment, I physically recovered from the incident, but I knew I would never fully recover, not mentally at least. After realising no one else would believe the ramblings of an insane man who had fallen to the ground and began screaming, I tried my best to act as if nothing was wrong. I got discharged with only some medications. After about a year, a long agonising year of only shreds of sleep, staring out into the forest, I moved out. I had enough money to do so, but it took a year for me to realise I could escape. I don't know why it took so long, perhaps I was blinded by fear, but now I was totally free. I wish I could say that's where it ended, that we never saw that thing again, but mere weeks after I left, I received a call. It was the police from the town my father lived in, the same officer that had investigated the initial assault. He informed me, with solemn tones, that my father was found on the floor of the basement, shriveled and seemingly drained of life, covered and surrounded by dark, long hair. I write this in the bathroom of my new small house in the hopes that everyone who reads it will heed my warning. If you see this horrible creature, or find bits of unexplainable, dark hair in your house, you can try to run, you can try to escape, but the 2 yellow discs I just saw out my window confirm that this creature will always follow you.